Good evening and welcome to Reading to the 246. My name is Karen Wall, but you can call me Auntie Karen. Reading to the 246 is a space where children of all ages, including us adults, can learn facts about Barbados, islands across the region, and the world. A special shout out to our viewers on Facebook and YouTube. I want to say thank you for joining us, but also don't forget to like, tag, and share. Happy New Month, everyone! Readers, we are in February, and this month is truly the month of love as we celebrate the love of all things Black. Black history, Black men and Black women, Black boys and Black girls who have impacted not only us here in Barbados, but across the world with their words, their actions, and of course, their inventions. There's a bit of magic in every girl and boy. How we choose to share our magic is unique and special to each of us. In doing so, we show that our magic is insurmountable and that we indeed matter and are seen. And this brings me to this evening's creative. Please welcome Zetta Elliott.
Thank you so much for having me, Karen.
Thank you for joining us. Zetta Elliott is an author of over 40 books for young readers, including the award-winning picture book, Bird, Melina's Jubilee, and A Place Inside of Me. Dragons in a Bag, a middle grade fantasy novel, was named an American Library Association notable children's book and was selected for the 2021 Global Read Aloud. Her young adult poetry collection, Say Her Name, was named a 2020 Best of the Best title by the Black Caucus of the American Library Association and was nominated for the YALSA Excellence in Nonfiction Award. Her own imprint, Rosetta's Press, generates culturally relevant stories that center on children who have been marginalized, misrepresented, and are rendered invisible in traditional children's literature. Elliott is an advocate for greater diversity and equity in publishing. She currently lives in Chicago, Illinois. Welcome again.
Thank you.
Now, I know this bio does not give our readers the full picture of Zetta. Please share with them your journey to sharing your magic through poetry and the writing of novels for children, through to adults.
Well, I guess one of the most important things to know about me is that I'm an immigrant, and I am the child of an immigrant. Most of my ancestors have moved around quite a bit. On my father's side, we're from Nevis, St. Kitts Nevis. So shout out to anybody from Nevis who's listening. Yes. And a good friend of mine, Susan Belgrave, was Bajan. She passed away a few years ago, but her dream was to open a children's bookstore in Barbados. And so it's lovely to meet folks who share her passion for children's literature. Growing up in Canada outside of Toronto, I didn't have very many books that centered Black children. I had the books of Ezra Jack Keats, a white Jewish man who made beautiful books. For us here in North America, The Snowy Day was a favorite. But after that, it was really difficult. And so I grew up not seeing myself represented in the books that I loved. And it's hard, to love something. You feel like you know the characters in the book, but to feel as though they don't love you back or they don't welcome you the way that you welcome them. And then, talking to my father, he always read the Bible. He read the newspaper every day. He never read anything else. And my mother, who was my kindergarten teacher, read voraciously. She always had a book in her hand. They got divorced when I was 8, and I can understand why. They were not very well matched. But, my father hated to read because his grandmother, God bless her, Bertha Hood, used to make him sit inside when he would rather be outside playing with his friends and read the classics. And of course, if you're growing up in a former British colony, then you're reading British classics. And so she wanted him to read Alice in Wonderland, and he hated that book. And because he was forced to read something that he couldn't relate to, he ended up having no love for reading. And I do really worry about that with the children. I've worked with children for 30 years. I know that there's often a conversation here in the US about the achievement gap, the literacy gap, and they're always pointing to Black boys not wanting to read and not being interested. But literacy has so many different components. It's not just about the skill of reading, it's about seeing yourself centered in the stories that are presented to you and being given a choice of what you want to read. So it has been my mission to give kids of color in particular a chance to take center stage, although I'm really looking for anybody who's been marginalized. Everyone deserves a chance. I'm trying not to exclude anyone. And when I moved to the United States, I had greater opportunities in terms of publishing. I still can't get published in Canada today, despite all of my credentials. Yeah, it's really frustrating. So there are systemic challenges within the publishing industry, but that doesn't stop me from writing. And I self-publish. I have had to self-publish 2/3 of my books. And I just approved a new book today, Chicken Wonders Why, which we can talk about a little bit later. But that really has been my journey, is sort of facing obstacles and challenges, facing a lot of rejection in the children's publishing industry, figuring out how to make my own books using print-on-demand technology that really has democratized publishing and enabled me to serve my community. And that's what I see as my role.
Yeah. I was smiling as you were talking about your dad reading the newspaper, because that is one of the things that helped me to read. My dad would ask me, my grandfather and my dad, because I lived with my extended family growing up, and they were bringing newspaper and they'd be like, you have to read this. So if I wanted to be able to go and play like your dad, I had to be able to read the article that they were telling me to read.
Absolutely.
So I can imagine. I was like, but on the reverse, I grew up loving reading. So I don't know. I guess it's different experiences, different things. So it's how we internalize and how we look at reading, I guess, from that perspective. Now, when we come back after the break, we'll go right into story time with Zetta Elliott as she reads an excerpt from the Enchanted Bridge, book 4 of the Dragons in the Bag series. Ooh, I'm excited. Okay, over to you, Zetta.
All right, everyone, this is book 4. So in order for book 4 to make sense, I have to tell you a little bit about what happened in books 1, 2, and 3, and I'm going to try to do that very quickly. My books are about a boy named Jackson. He's Jax for short. He lives in Brooklyn with his mom. His father passed away a few years ago. He has to stay for one day with an old woman who's kind of grouchy. Her name is Ma. And when he goes to stay with her for one day, he discovers that she's actually a witch. She is about to retire. She has one last job before she can stop working forever. And that job is to take 3 baby dragons to the realm of magic. Jax agrees to help her. He only gets 2 to the realm of magic because there's a dragon thief. So in book 2, he has to find the dragon thief and return the last dragon to the realm of magic where it belongs. Does it belong in the realm of magic? What happens to the human world when all the magic is gone? Well, things start to go berserk, and Jax has to figure out a way to restore balance. Now, at the end of book 3, The Witch's Apprentice, Jax meets a wizard called Olkoruk, which means the crow in Maasai. And the crow says, I have built an enchanted bridge. It will take you to the realm of magic, and there you will meet my sister, the guardian of the realm of magic. You must convince her to open the portals so that magical creatures can return to the human world. And Jax thinks, well, that's a good idea. And they go downtown in Chicago to Millennium Park, where there's a sculpture called the Bean. Its official name is Cloudgate, but they call it a bean because it's a giant silver kidney bean. It looks like a mirror. So imagine we have 4 friends, Jax, Kenny, Vikram, and Kavita. They are standing underneath the bean when it starts to get lower and lower. It's about to crush them, and then they are sucked inside. Everything happens all at once. I am falling. I am flailing. I am mired in a pool of tar. I am soaring among the stars. When time is linear, one thing happens after another. When it's not, things get messy. I brought us here. I wanted to be a leader, and my friends followed me to Cloudgate in downtown Chicago. I have been given an important mission by the Supreme Council. I used to have another job, but now I am the ambassador who will convince the guardian of Palmyra to open the portals linking her realm to ours. I am going to free the magical creatures being held against their will. I failed as a witch's apprentice, but I won't fail again. Will I? These thoughts swirl in my mind like a tempest. Who I was, who I am, who I will become. I hear the fear and panic in my friends' voices as the mirrored surface of the bean-shaped sculpture presses us to the ground. We are being flattened against the pavement. We are being sucked into a sticky blackness that stifles our screams. We are floating weightless in a distant galaxy. It can't be happening all at once, and yet it is. I feel frightened. I feel angry. I feel guilty. I led my friends straight into this trap, and I can't do anything to help them. My stomach sinks with the weight of my shame. Then it lurches as the giant silver bean starts to spin. The treacherous wizard Alcora cackles as we clamor for help. Ah, dear guests, you have finally arrived. I have waited for this day for 1,000 years. Let me say it again. You are welcome.
That was such a cliffhanger.
You have to leave them wanting more.
I'm here wanting more, and I'm sure my readers want more as well. I'm sure you're gonna get some books flying off of Amazon as we try to figure out what happens to after you are welcome. Are there any plans to write or expand this series any further?
So yes, there is one more book in the series, book 5, The War of the Witches, that will come out next year. And then I started a prequel. So a book that looks at the witch who's about to retire. She's over 100 years old. It looks at her when she's a young girl living in Chicago in the summer of 1919, which was a really important year here and across the United States. There were a lot of protests, and there was a lot of actually violence between whites and blacks in the big cities. And so that's the first time Lavinia, who grows up to be Ma, that's the first time she travels to the realm of magic, and she meets the guardian and discovers that she has witch powers. So that book, I haven't finished it, but I have started it. And that would be the last book in the series for sure.
Now, why is it important? Because I realize you're talking about magic, but you're sharing Black history in a very inventive and creative way. Why is it so important to do so?
You know, I love history. I grew up with a grandmother, my mother's mother, who constantly talked about our Negro ancestors. And I didn't know what she meant by Negro, but she was always talking about Bishop Richard Allen, who was the founder of the AME Church, the African Methodist Episcopal Church. And she believed, had been told throughout her life, that her family, the Allens, were descended from John Allen, who was the bishop's brother. And so we always understood that, you know, our ancestors had been enslaved in the United States and that they had migrated to Canada for freedom, and that they had settled and they had farmed, and that it was important for us not to forget where we came from and not to forget that people had sacrificed for us to be where we were. My father was a bit more conservative, but then he had a Black Power movement in the 1970s when I was growing up, and he led an Afrocentric summer school. And so one summer we just went downtown to his high school. He was also a teacher, and he taught us all about the empires of ancient Africa, and we made masks and we watched Roots, which had just come out at the time. So I grew up, I come from a family where history matters. My grandparents, more so than my parents, were interested in storytelling and keeping family traditions alive. And so for me, when I talk to kids and they sort of groan when you mention Black history, right, it's because they feel like they already know about Martin Luther King and they already know about Rosa Parks and they don't want to watch another movie or read another book. And that's not all there is to history. History isn't just about single individuals, it's about communities and partnerships and the ways people work together to create change, to build the world they want to live in. So for me, I'm an immigrant. I'm new to Chicago. I've only been here a couple of years, but everywhere I live, I try to find out who lived here before me. What were Black people doing here before I got here? And then I try to insert a little bit into my book because I'm writing about magic. It's not that hard to create a scenario where there are ghosts that can tell about the past or time travel. In the Dragon series, they're always getting into a portal and traveling through time. So I have lots of tools at my disposal, and the trick is to just find the right balance where you're still telling a good story. It's exciting. The reader cares about the characters and their relationships, and so they're willing to listen and to go on a sort of tour of Chicago or New York or wherever I'm writing about, and to just recognize that we owe a debt to the people who came before us. That's why we're here. That's why we have the opportunities we have today.
Yeah, and that goes into my next question. They've planted seeds, and now you're planting seeds. So we're not only planting seeds for the young, we're also planting seeds for our adult readers like myself. Is it a difficult transition having to write across such a varied age group?
I actually find it really liberating so that if I come up with a story idea, I know I have multiple audiences. I can address multiple audiences. And the truth is that even if I'm writing a picture book, which is intended for young children, there's a pretty good chance an adult is going to read it to them. So you are almost always addressing multiple audiences at once. Dragons in a Bag, the first book, was selected for the Global Read Aloud. And so that's another fun family activity. Teachers will read a book aloud to their students. I was a college professor for 10 years. My college students loved being read to. They absolutely loved it. And having a read aloud, having a text that you're looking at while someone is reading it aloud actually enhances comprehension. So it's a really good teaching tool. It's fun for road trips. I have parents who tweet and tell me that they're listening to my books on a road trip. When I have a topic that, might not be as appropriate for children, although there aren't too many topics that I can't imagine talking with kids about, then I can just calibrate. I can dial it up, I can dial it down. I'm about to publish a book of poetry called Perennial. And unfortunately, it's about how frequent, and you can almost set your watch to, the murder of Black people by police officers here in the United States. And, I have a picture book for that, A Place Inside of Me, if you want to talk to your kids about that. If you're an adult, then you might want to read Perennial. If you're a teenager, then you might want to read Say Her Name, so that I can talk about one issue, but I can calibrate and make sure it's accessible and appropriate to different age groups. And then if I get stuck on a project, I just switch gears and move to another genre, move to another audience. I find it really liberating. It frees you up as opposed to constraining me.
You also have a children's picture book that are you ready to share it with our readers now?
I am. Thank you so much for the opportunity, because this book hasn't even come out yet. It is called Chicken Wonders Why. And, it's funny because Black authors, when we do get published, we're often not allowed to publish certain kinds of books, and animal books are often considered sort of the territory of white male authors. And I don't understand why, because I grew up loving animal stories and I write them, but it has been really hard to get them published. And so I tend to self-publish them. This book I wrote because a woman in Tennessee wanted to have my book banned, A Place Inside of Me. And she didn't think it was suitable for children. And she said, "Whatever happened to books about chickens?" And so I thought, if you want a book about chickens, I can write that for you. So
Yeah,
I did.
Chicken Wonders Why.
And what we know coming from African cultures, from the African diaspora, is that fables which generally have animal characters, right? Fables are used to pass down lessons, to instill morals and values. So I'm actually happy to be part of that tradition. I remember certainly reading Anansi stories when I was a kid. So
Me too.
yeah. Here we go. Chicken lived on a farm. Dick and Jane made sure all the animals had enough to eat. In the evening, all the animals gathered in the barn for a bedtime story. This was Chicken's favorite part of the day. The farmer's tales always began with once upon a time. He told the animals about humans living in faraway lands who fought dragons or used maps to find buried treasure. Any villain who tried to stop the hero was always defeated. When the story was over, Jane would say, and they lived happily ever after. Then she and her husband returned to the farmhouse, and all the animals went to sleep. Chicken often dreamed that she was brave as a knight in shining armor, or wise as the king that ruled from his throne in a castle. Chicken had never seen a knight or a king or a castle, but the farmer's stories were so thrilling that she felt as if she really was part of the adventure. One day, Dick and Jane went on vacation. The animals waved goodbye as the farmers got in their truck and drove away. A neighbor stopped by each morning to make sure everyone had enough to eat. But at night, there was no one to tell them a bedtime story. The animals sat together in the silent barn. Suddenly, Chicken had an idea. Why doesn't someone else tell the story tonight? The animals stared at Chicken. Some gasped. Others shook their heads. We don't know any stories that are as good as the farmers, said Horse. Pig cleared his throat. Actually, I do. You wallow in mud all day, sneered Goat. You can't tell us a bedtime story. Why not? Asked Chicken. No one had an answer for that, so Pig moved to the center of the barn and began to tell his tale. Last week, when the mud was soft and warm, 3 clever piglets. No, 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 Goat cried, stomping her hoof. You can't start a story that way. Why not? Chicken asked. The farmer always starts his story with once upon a time, Horse reminded her, and all his stories are about, well, people. Why does every story have to start the same way? Chicken asked. And humans aren't the only ones who can have adventures. But aren't there rules? Asked Mouse. Are we allowed to tell a different kind of story? No one knew for sure. But since no one was there to stop them, Pig continued telling his story his own way, and it was a wonderful tale. These are some of my favorite pages. The illustrations are by Purple Wong, so kids can look at the picture and decide what kind of story is Pig telling. Well, we have the piglets in the mud, and then there's a tractor that's for sale, and then they build something that wins them an award. All right, Karen, should I stop there?
I was just so engrossed. I was just like this and find out if Chicken got a chance to tell her own story. But as I said, readers, if you want to find out, make your way over to share with them, Zetta. Where should they make their way over to?
So the self-published books like Chicken Wonders Why are available on Amazon. All of my books are on Amazon, but the self-published books are actually, the picture books are only available there. So you'd have to go there. If you shop at Bookshop, if you're trying to avoid Amazon, bookshop.org is another website. They have a lot of my books, and you can get links to all of them on my website, which is zettaelliott.com.
Nice. Now, what is Rosetta Press? And why is it important for children who are underrepresented and marginalized?
Yeah. So when I first started self-publishing, I have to say I was pretty reluctant. And my cousin said, "Oh, but you know what? You should really give it a try. Just look into it." Because I sort of, like many people, looked down my nose at self-publishers. And I thought, well, I'm not going to be selling books out of the trunk of my car. And I didn't think I should have to because I had an award-winning book. My first book, Bird, won so many prizes and awards, and I had 20 other stories ready to go. And I just kept getting the thumbs down from editors. And finally, I just thought, I can let my stories sit on my computer and reach nobody, or I can give them a chance to live in the world. And so I tried a few print on demand platforms and settled with Amazon's platform because it's really easy to use. It's kind of self-publishing for dummies. And at that time, Amazon gave you the option to list an imprint. So technically, I am not a publisher. I am a self-publisher. I only publish my own material. And the imprint was an opportunity to say, Amazon is the publisher, Amazon is making the books, but I am curating in the way that a curator in a museum selects what will be on display. I am curating a collection of books that have my values, my Black feminist values, which are all about emphasizing the humanity of Black people, emphasizing Black excellence and achievement, centering children who have been marginalized in order to build a love of reading, printing paperback books, which were more affordable. I mean, I know how expensive books are in the Caribbean, and they're pretty expensive here too. A brand new hardcover book is $20. That's a lot of money. And so a paperback book is half that here in the US. They get you on shipping, of course, but I can make affordable books, which means that parents who are working class can afford to build a home library because we know kids that have books in the home, even if those books are never taken off the shelf, just having books on a shelf in your home improves children's performance in school and makes them stay in school longer. We're not entirely sure why, but just it sends a signal that literacy is valued. So that's really my mission, was to make books more affordable and also in a way to demonstrate just what gets the thumbs down, right? Like we'll never know how many authors, Black authors, simply gave up because a publisher said what they said to me, which is, Zetta, you write beautifully. There's no market for these kinds of books. And that's just wrong. Black people in the US have over $1 trillion in spending power. Black people love to read. Black women, especially in the United States, are some of the biggest purchasers of books. So publishers, they're walking away from money because they won't market to Black readers. They won't, give the green light to stories that center Black children. It's pretty frustrating, but print on demand technology means you can step aside all of that and then decide to curate your own list with books that represent your values.
Yeah, but Black women and Black children here in the Caribbean, literacy is a big thing for us. So reading is important. So, like you said, they're walking away from it. But here in the Caribbean, we are fighting to find books where we see ourselves,
Yeah.
where our children, where we're able to share stories, where our children will be able to see themselves. So I love, yes, I like books about magic. I watched the whole magical series. So I'm looking forward someday in the future to seeing dragons in a bag with a little Black boy running around solving different things. Did you always see yourself becoming a novelist? Did you always see yourself doing this?
I was a storyteller from a very early age. I was the youngest in my initial family configuration. And, when you're the youngest, you get ignored a lot. And one way for me to get attention, certainly in the schoolyard, was to tell a good story. So I learned early on that storytelling had a lot of value. But I didn't write outside of school because I didn't know how books were made. I didn't know you could become an author. I'd never met an author, I'd never seen an author. And it was a high school teacher of mine, Nancy Vickard, who pulled me aside and said, if you want to be a writer, you will be. You don't need anyone's permission. You just have to decide, and you have to write every day. So as a teenager, I began to write outside of school. That was sort of my first time writing without the expectation of getting a grade, because, I was a good student. School was pretty easy for me. And I loved to get a big red A. on my stories and things that I turned in. But, you know, when you're writing for yourself, you really have to be self-motivated. It is important to have a writing community. I'm fortunate that my closest friends were also writers. We were sort of secret closet writers, and then we realized we were all doing the same thing. So we came out of the closet and started writing together. And when I finish anything, I send it to my best friend, Kate, who lives in Nova Scotia, and she reads things over for me. I read things over for her. But you know, because I have faced a lot of rejection, you have to believe in the value of your voice. You have to believe in the value of your stories. Like I said, I think it's important to give your work a chance to live in the world. I don't recommend anyone going into children's literature to get rich because that rarely happens. Sure, J.K. Rowling's a billionaire, but that isn't going to happen for the vast majority of people. I've won a few awards, but I haven't won the really big awards. So in some people's estimation, I'm not really a successful writer. You have to have your own definition of success. And for me, the fact that I'm able to reach my community, that I have sovereignty over my work, I can write about what I want, when I want. And that's largely because of the success of the Dragon series that pays the bills. I'm fortunate to be a full-time writer. Most writers also can't afford to do that. For most of my career, I was a professor or I was working with kids part-time. So being able to just get up every day, my dad used to say that nobody can get up every day and just write. And I was like, I can. I can and I do. So I feel very blessed, but it wasn't until I was a teenager that I began to think of writing as a profession. And even then, you know, I went to school to be a professor. I didn't think about, you know, getting an MFA or studying creative writing. You don't have to do that. That's one route. It's expensive. Really, you just have to make a commitment and develop a writing practice. Every day you write for a certain amount of time every day, even if it's just 10 minutes, make a commitment to set aside time for writing.
So, Zita, from your full overall, from your series, from Chicken Wanders Way, you know the message you're trying to share there. Is there any special message that a little black girl or a little black boy should take away from the Dragons in the Bag series?
Ooh, well, magic is for everyone. That's what I really want kids to know. I grew up reading British fantasy fiction, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and The Secret Garden, and E. Nesbit. And, you know, those books are unfortunately quite racist and sexist and imperialist and classist. And they are meant to teach certain values that do not align with my own values or the values of my community. So the important thing I want children to know is that magic can happen to anyone, anywhere. You do not have to live in a castle in England to experience magic. You do not have to have a dragon coming out of a cave filled with gold. Or if you do, that cave could be in the Caribbean. We got plenty of caves. We got
Yeah.
volcanoes, we got geothermal energy, we got all kinds of things. We got mermaids, we got, you know, anything magical can happen in your community. It just depends on looking around and seeing what's possible. Always ask yourself, what if? Because that's how all good stories begin. What if?
Yep. So what if I should decide to visit Harris's Cave, children, and I happen to see in my imagination a dragon? Or what if I decide that I'm going to visit the Fair, go to the hot springs and discover that there's gold underneath there, keeping it hot. There's so many things. What if? So, readers, I hope you've been paying attention. Today's question goes, how many books are in the series Dragon in the Bag, written by author Zetta Elliott? Let me repeat it for you. How many books are in the series Dragon in the Bag, written by author Zetta Elliott? Now, you can share your answers in the chat across all of our platforms, YouTube, Facebook, and here in Zoom, you can do that as well. When we come back, it's time for a Bajan mashup. Zetta, are you ready to get into the Bajan mashup?
I hope so.
Now, a memory or person who inspired you as a child that you may have incorporated into your books in a special way.
I was very close to my grandmothers, and I have several. I have 4 or 5 grandmothers, people that I called grandma. And I definitely incorporated them into the series in the sense that Jax, as a child, is looking to Ma for answers, for guidance, for validation and affirmation. And I certainly turned to my grandmothers for all of that. Now, my grandmothers would never curse. They would never be cranky or have a harsh word for me. They did not drink root beer, as Ma does in the book. But she's definitely, that character is informed by how close I was to my grandmothers.
A meal in Chicago that I should try if I visit.
I think the stereotypical answer would be deep dish pizza. We are known for deep dish pizza or some kind of beef, Italian beef sandwiches. I have not tried those. I'm not such a big meat eater, but I have to say, one of my favorite restaurants is Senegalese, and it's in Bronzeville. It's called Yassa. And I highly recommend their food. My favorite dish there is chibuganar, which is
Oh,
spiced chicken with plantain and jollof rice. So
oh, listen, you just taught my language. When you said jollof rice and then you said plantain. Oh my God, I love plantain.
yes,
Oh, I can
yes.
eat plantain every day. Oh,
Oh, yum.
oh. A connection that you have to Barbados or even the Caribbean that is unique.
That is unique. I think it was probably the fact that I went to London. Gosh, maybe it was 10 years ago. I used to go over to London quite a bit. And while I was in London, I met Susan Belgrave. And Susan, we kept in touch and we became friends. And then one day she said, can we have dinner the next time you're in town? I want to ask you something. And usually when people say that, they're going to say, I have this idea for a story. And could you tell me how to write it? And it wasn't at all. She said, what do you think about a bookmobile? And what do you think about having a bus full of books that could be driven around Barbados? Because if you only have a store in one town, then the kids in the other villages can't necessarily get to it. And she just was full of energy and ideas. And yeah, I miss her, but I'll always remember that she had that idea. Maybe we can bring it to life someday.
Maybe we should. Maybe definitely we should. True or false? Chicago was famously known as a pivotal stop in the Underground Railroad during the fight for emancipation in the United States.
So I've only been in Chicago 2 years. I lived in New York for 20 years, and certainly there were a lot of big, important depots, stations on the Underground Railroad in Brooklyn. But what I do know about Chicago is that it is a place where there is a confluence of rivers. Rivers meet, and wherever you have waterways, you have people who are on the move. And so, yes, this was part of the Underground Railroad, and people were heading north. They were trying to get to Canada, where they could not be captured and returned to their enslavers in the United States. So I'm going to say that's true.
Yep, it is true. In fact, I think I also read that Chicago has one of the only rivers that flows backwards.
Yes. Don't ask me
I,
to explain that,
no,
but it's true.
yeah. A message to all parents and children about the importance of allowing our children to see themselves in books.
Oh, yes. I mean, one of the reasons I think that we have children is that we want them to grow into the world and realize their potential. And so we try to be good role models. I was just with my nieces in Montreal this past weekend, and I was, debating things with them and pushing them to explain themselves and defend their ideas because I see their brilliance and I want them to keep reaching for different ideas. And I think maybe what parents don't always realize is that books are mirrors. Books are a way of having kids see a reflection, and books are art. I consider myself an artist. I'm a writer, but I'm an artist, and art doesn't only show what's real, it shows what's possible. So I know that there are I come from a very, very devout religious family. Both of my parents grew up in the Pilgrim Holiness Church, pretty strict. And, we weren't allowed to read horoscopes or anything like that. And so when I first began writing my stories, some of my relatives were like, I'm not reading a book about a witch. And I really had to make sure that they understood what I was doing. I think we have inherited a lot of ideas from Europeans. And we have this idea of a witch having a pointy black hat and a wart in her nose and stirring a cauldron. And, a witch in many ways, in many cultures, is a woman with power. And quite often the power she has is the power to heal, right? It's Mayal. It's not necessarily Obeah. And I understand there would be some reticence around that because magic is power. It really is. But if we're preparing our children to live, to shape a different kind of world, then we have to give them the tools. We have to let them know they have the power and how to use it responsibly and ethically and how to use it to heal themselves and others. We have faced a lot of challenges, but we've never been turned around. And I think what I hope parents understand from my books for children, and for just books in general, is that literacy is a door. It's a way of opening up the world and making it a much bigger place. And it's about teaching children that they have the power and the potential to be builders of worlds, right? That's partly what we do with storytelling. We're world building. So I hope parents understand that about books, and my books in particular.
So you hear that, parents? Literacy, I'm going to change it up a little bit. Literacy is the magic that opens the door for our children to build worlds. Find yourself a book. Hopefully you find several this evening. That's a Farbeja mashup. Now, on our previous show, Simon Says went, once upon a time in Greens, you would have found me full of folklore, silk, and cotton. And if you were wondering what I was talking about, at one point there was a large silk cotton tree in the parish of Greens, as you see it there on the screen. And this tree would give off these pods with this lovely silk. But it was great. It was interesting. You used to actually feel when you were walking through it, it was snow falling. But what it was good, it was fun for me. Some of the adults didn't like it because it used to irritate their sinuses. But I remember growing up as a girl seeing the silk cotton tree. Now, this week Simon Says goes, for over the boardwalk, my eyes can see of rum, molasses, and special spirits. My red brick walls once held, and cotton. So let's go again. From over the boardwalk, my eyes can see of rum, molasses, and special spirits. My red brick walls once held, and cotton. Who, what, or where am I? I read it one more time if I can see it. They're trying to figure out where it is I'm talking about. So from over the boardwalk, and the boardwalk is a new addition, my eyes can see of rum, molasses, and special spirits. My red brick walls once held, and cotton. Who, what, or where am I? I give you a clue. It is right there in Bridgetown. Now remember, children and parents, to like, comment, and share on our Reading to the 246 Facebook and Instagram, as well as our YouTube pages. Special thank you to you, Zetta Elliott, for agreeing to be part of the Reading to the 246 family. You can visit her on Instagram at Zetta Elliott, or you can visit her on her website at www.zettaelliott.com. Anything to share before we go, Zetta?
I just want to thank you. I'm so thrilled that there is a podcast in Barbados reaching out to all of the Caribbean and all of the world to share the love of children's books. And thank you so much for inviting me to be a guest.
Thank you so much for joining us. Now, finally, I hope everyone had an enjoyable weekend. I literally jumped the gun last week, and it was issued with a false start, actually, when they said that Knapsack Zone Meets had started from last week, but they're actually going to start from this week. So I'm looking forward now to seeing all of you at Usain Bolt supporting your schools and supporting your athletes. Now, don't forget, you can share your birthday greetings via messages if you want to shout out during the show. Again, a quick check-in to see how your reading goals are going. You don't have an additional 4 books, or 40 books, I should say, that you can add to your list. And also, please try and make it a family affair. Always remember, a book a day is going to keep all that brain fog away. Literacy is the magic that is going to open doors to building new worlds. Finally, Reading to the 246 wants to remind all of your readers. Reading takes you where your imagination can't. Have a great evening, guys.
Bye-bye. All right, Karen.
Bye, Eileen.
Bye.